At the Rusty Fork Cafe, in the heart of Baltimore, the morning bustle was in full swing. The warm, rustic decor and vintage lights created an inviting atmosphere. Marcus, the waiter known for his efficiency and constant smile, moved deftly from table to table, balancing trays while greeting regulars. His ability to handle a diverse range of customers was remarkable, but that day, an encounter shifted the course of his routine entirely. At the third table by the window sat a young woman, likely in her early 30s, in a wheelchair. Her appearance was simple yet striking. Chestnut brown hair tied practically, a blue blouse that complemented her clear eyes, and a serene but introspective expression. As Marcus approached to take her order, she looked up and smiled faintly. "A black coffee and maybe a slice of apple pie," she requested, her voice soft and polite. Marcus jotted it down and, upon delivering the coffee, the woman extended a folded envelope toward him. "This is for you, please." "It's important," she said, her hand trembling slightly as she handed him the paper. Intrigued, Marcus held the envelope. It was yellowed, as if kept for a long time, and contained a folded newspaper clipping. Upon opening it, the headline jumped out at him: "Boy survives fire at shelter, rescued by local firefighter." The date was from 20 years ago. "What does this have to do with me?" he asked, puzzled, looking back at the woman. She averted her gaze, seemingly struggling with a flood of emotions. "You don't remember, do you?" she murmured. "I was there too." Marcus felt the impact of her words. He was the boy from the article. "How do you—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his past rushing back like a whirlwind. He remembered flashes of the fire, the sirens, the unbearable heat, but not the woman. "I'm Jennifer," she continued, looking directly at him. "We were rescued together. But there's more. Something that was never told." Time seemed to freeze. The cafe's conversations turned into distant noise. The only sound Marcus could hear was the pounding of his own heart. He needed to understand why she had reappeared after all these years. Jennifer pointed to the clipping. "Read the end of the article. Not now, but when you're alone. There's something you need to know. Something that will change everything." Without further explanation, she offered a faint smile, paid for her coffee, and wheeled herself to the door, moving with the precision of someone long accustomed to the wheelchair. Marcus stood frozen, clutching the clipping, his heart racing. Something in Jennifer's tone told him this wouldn't be their only meeting. And so, the first chapter of this compelling story ended with more questions than answers. What did she know? And why, after 2 decades, had she chosen now to reveal herself? Baltimore awoke to its usual frenetic pace, but in Marcus's mind, everything seemed to move in slow motion. He couldn't stop thinking about the newspaper clipping Jennifer had handed him at the Rusty Fork Cafe. The story had been buried for years in his memory, now resurrected like an unhealed wound. During a break between serving coffee and pancakes, Marcus found a quiet moment in the small office at the back of the cafe. Sitting down, he carefully unfolded the clipping. The words jumped off the page again: "Boy survives fire at shelter, rescued by local firefighter." He read and reread every line, looking for something to justify Jennifer's sudden appearance. At the end of the article, a single line stood out. Local sources reported that the fire may have been deliberately set, but investigations never reached a conclusion. Marcus furrowed his brow. Deliberately set? No one had ever mentioned that. At the time, he'd been just a 9-year-old boy, remembering only the chaos: smoke, screams, and the sound of firefighters. He couldn't fathom someone intentionally causing such devastation. Just then, his phone buzzed on the counter. A message. It was from Jennifer. "Jennifer, we need to talk. Meet me at Patterson Park, near the lake, at 7 p.m. At 7 that evening, Marcus arrived at the park, a place he associated with peaceful childhood afternoons, now shrouded in a foreboding atmosphere. Jennifer was waiting on a bench, wrapped in a gray coat, staring at the water's rippling surface. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said as he approached. I need to know. Why now? Why the clipping? Marcus asked directly, sitting beside her. Jennifer took a deep breath, as if bracing herself to carry a heavy burden. Do you remember someone named Robert Garrison? She asked. Marcus squinted, searching his memory. The name was familiar but faint. He was the director of the shelter back then, she explained. And he was the one who took most of the responsibility when the fire happened. Marcus shook his head. No, I don't remember much about him. Just the panic, the firefighters, and being taken to the hospital. Jennifer continued, her voice tense. Robert Garrison was more than just the director. He had a direct connection to you. Marcus felt his breath catch. What are you saying? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jennifer hesitated, then finally revealed. He was your biological father. Her words hung in the air, heavy. Marcus sat frozen, trying to process what she had just said. That doesn't make sense. I was at the shelter because I didn't have a family. Jennifer looked at him with sorrowful eyes. Exactly. He couldn't publicly acknowledge you. It was complicated. I found out by accident, just before the fire. That's why I've come to you now. I don't think the fire was an accident, Marcus. I think someone wanted to ensure you never found out the truth. As they walked through the park following her revelation, Jennifer handed Marcus an envelope stuffed with documents she had held onto for years. Inside were records from the shelter, correspondence between Robert and staff, and even a crumpled photo of Robert holding a baby. Marcus recognized the look in the photo. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. Before he could ask more questions, a distant sound caught his attention. A black car, parked across the street, seemed to be watching them. When Marcus looked directly at it, the vehicle sped off into the night. Did you see that? Marcus asked, alarmed. Jennifer nodded, her expression serious. Someone doesn't want you to know the truth. On the way back to his small apartment in the Fells Point neighborhood, Marcus called his old friend Laura Davis, a lawyer he'd known since school. Laura, I need your help. This is big, he said, his voice tinged with urgency. Marcus, what's going on? Laura asked from the other end of the line. He hesitated but then replied, I think someone's hiding something about my past. And it might be dangerous. At 11 p.m., Laura arrived at Marcus's apartment, carrying her laptop and the sharp determination that defined her. As Marcus showed her the documents Jennifer had handed over, Laura examined them with her usual meticulousness. These records have strange gaps, she said, pointing at the pages. It looks like parts of the files were deliberately erased or altered. That's not normal. Marcus felt a pit forming in his stomach. Laura, I need to know. Who was Robert Garrison really? And who would burn down an entire building to hide this? Laura closed her laptop with a determined look. We'll find out, Marcus. But you need to be ready. This might be bigger than you think. And so, the mystery deepened. Marcus now knew his past was entangled in dark secrets, but he also realized he wasn't alone in this fight. Far from Baltimore, in the cold industrial city of Detroit, Michigan, Laura Davis uncovered a lead that could finally bring clarity to Marcus's murky past. Using her legal contacts, she tracked down archived files tied to the shelter fire in Baltimore. The case surrounding Robert Garrison seemed far more complex than Marcus had imagined. As Marcus packed for the trip, Jennifer insisted on joining him. I knew Robert better than you think, she said firmly. And I don't trust that you'll be safe on your own. After a long discussion, Marcus relented. Together, they boarded a plane bound for Detroit, where Laura awaited with crucial information. Detroit greeted them with its usual chill, the biting wind cutting through layers of clothing. Laura met them at a small cafe in the historic Corktown neighborhood, an area of revitalization and decay, a fitting metaphor for their search. We have a lot to discuss, but not here, Laura said, gesturing for them to follow her. The three of them made their way to Laura's makeshift office, a small, cluttered space in an old building. Once inside, Laura locked the door and activated a signal blocker. "We have to be careful," she warned. "Someone clearly doesn't want this story to come out. But I think I know why." Laura opened her laptop and displayed documents she had accessed through federal archives. Among them were exchanges between Robert Garrison and a woman named Eleanor Hart, a shadowy figure who appeared to be Robert's partner in dubious dealings. Eleanor Hart was known for operating money laundering schemes through social service shelters, Laura explained. There's evidence that the Baltimore shelter was one of her fronts. Robert must have discovered this. Jennifer turned pale. "So, the fire, it could have been to cover up those operations?" she asked. Laura nodded grimly. "It's possible. What's more, Robert seemed to be preparing to blow the whistle. There's a note in his records suggesting he was ready to expose Eleanor. This happened just days before the fire." The discovery shook Marcus. He stood, pacing the small room as fragments of memory sharpened. He recalled Robert holding him tightly during the fire, saying something he hadn't understood as a child. "He said, 'They can't find you,'" Marcus whispered. Laura stared at him, alarmed. "Who can't find you?" she asked. Jennifer touched Marcus's arm. "This might have to do with Eleanor and the people she worked with. These weren't small-time criminals. Robert was up against something huge." Marcus felt the weight of the moment but knew he couldn't back down. He needed answers, and their only lead was Eleanor Hart. Laura had already found an address linked to her operations. "She has a property here in Detroit. An abandoned warehouse in the Rivertown Industrial District. It's worth investigating," Laura suggested. That night, the trio drove to Rivertown. The area was desolate, a maze of old warehouses and factories shrouded in dense fog. Parking a safe distance away, they approached the address Laura had uncovered. The building appeared derelict, but upon entering, they saw signs of recent activity. Modern equipment and sealed crates suggested the space was still in use for clandestine purposes. Laura led the way with a flashlight, while Jennifer kept watch. Marcus inspected one of the crates and found papers with diagrams and encrypted notes. But it was Laura who made the critical discovery, a safe embedded in the floor. "This looks important," she said, pointing to the steel door. "How do we open it?" Jennifer asked. Marcus looked around and found a crowbar. Using all his strength, he pried at the edges until the safe finally opened. Inside were stacks of documents and an old cassette tape. They grabbed everything and decided to leave before anyone showed up. Back at Laura's office, they began combing through the contents. The documents confirmed Eleanor Hart's involvement in laundering money through shelters and listed several prominent names. But the cassette tape held the most shocking revelation. Laura found an old recorder and pressed play. Robert Garrison's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, it means something went wrong. I know they're coming for me, but I can't let Marcus fall into their hands. Eleanor will destroy anyone who threatens her. But Marcus, he is the key. He's the only one who can expose the truth." The room fell silent. "The key?" Marcus asked, stunned. "What does that even mean?" Before they could analyze further, the sound of screeching tires broke the stillness. Laura peered through the window and saw two black SUVs pulling up outside the building. "We've got company," she said. Jennifer turned to Marcus. "He was right. You're in danger." Marcus felt the gravity of the situation, but he knew there was no turning back now. He had to confront whatever was hidden in his past, and now it was a fight for survival. The screech of tires outside echoed like an alarm in Marcus's ears. From the second-floor window of Laura's office in Corktown, Detroit, he, Jennifer, and Laura watched as two black SUVs parked below. 6 men in dark clothing emerged, moving with the precision of professionals. Laura acted quickly. "Grab everything and follow me." "We can't stay here," she instructed, shoving documents and the cassette tape into her bag. Jennifer looked at Marcus with wide eyes. "Do you think Eleanor sent them?" she asked. "Who else?" Marcus replied, his voice tense. Laura led the group down a narrow corridor to the building's back exit. The sound of heavy boots climbing the stairs grew closer. "We have to move," Laura urged. They slipped out into the alley behind the building. The dimly lit space offered limited cover, and the icy Detroit air bit at their faces. Laura gestured toward her old sedan parked a few blocks away. "Over there. Hurry." As they ran, the men realized their targets had fled. Shouts rang out from the front of the building, and soon, the sound of pursuit echoed behind them. Laura unlocked the car with trembling hands, and everyone piled in. The engine roared to life, and she sped off, weaving through Detroit's industrial streets. "They're following us," Jennifer yelled, looking back to see the SUVs gaining on them. Marcus clenched his fists. "What's the plan? We can't outrun them forever." "I know these streets," Laura replied. "Hold on." She made a sharp turn onto a narrow, poorly lit road leading toward Rivertown, the industrial district they had explored earlier. The SUVs struggled to maneuver the tight corners, buying them precious seconds. The chase came to a head as Laura drove into an abandoned warehouse lot. She killed the headlights and parked behind a rusting container. "Out. Now," she ordered. The group jumped out, crouching behind the container. The SUVs roared into the lot moments later, their headlights sweeping across the area. Jennifer whispered, "What do we do now?" Laura pulled out a can of pepper spray from her pocket. "We ambush them. We just need to delay them long enough for the police to arrive. I called them before we left the office." Marcus grabbed a heavy wrench lying on the ground nearby. "Let's make this count." The men exited the SUVs, splitting into pairs as they searched the lot. Marcus and Laura ambushed the first two, Marcus using the wrench to knock one man to the ground while Laura sprayed the other in the face. Both attackers dropped, incapacitated. Jennifer used a pipe to trip a third man before he could react. But their advantage was short-lived. The remaining attackers regrouped, guns drawn. "Hands up," one shouted. The group froze, outnumbered and outgunned. Tension hung in the cold air, but just as it seemed hopeless, the distant sound of sirens cut through the silence. The attackers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. The men retreated, jumping back into their SUVs and speeding off into the night. Marcus, Jennifer, and Laura collapsed against the container, catching their breath as the flashing blue lights of police vehicles illuminated the lot. The officers approached cautiously, questioning the group. Laura provided a brief explanation, omitting the more dangerous details. "We were chased by people trying to harm us. We don't know why," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The police promised to investigate but left the group uneasy. They knew Eleanor's reach extended far beyond local law enforcement. Later that night, at a motel outside Detroit, the group finally had a moment to regroup. Laura spread out the documents from the safe on the bed, while Jennifer sat beside her, cradling the cassette tape. Marcus paced the room, the events of the day replaying in his mind. "These documents. They don't just incriminate Eleanor," Laura said. "There are names of politicians, CEOs, law enforcement officers. This is a web of corruption that stretches across the country." Marcus stared at the photo of Robert Garrison holding a baby, him. "He risked everything for me. He wanted me to expose this," Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. Jennifer placed a hand on his shoulder. "And we will. But we need to be smart. We can't let them catch us again." Laura looked at a map spread out on the table. "Our best move is to get out of Detroit. I know someone in Cleveland, Ohio, who can help us. He's a retired investigator, but he's brilliant with uncovering hidden trails." Marcus nodded. "Then that's where we go. But we need to keep moving. Eleanor's people won't stop." The drive to Cleveland was long and tense. They traded shifts driving, stopping only briefly for gas and food. Every car on the highway felt like a potential threat. As the lights of Cleveland came into view, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something even more dangerous. In Cleveland, they met Laura's contact, Sam Lewis, a former private investigator known for his expertise in uncovering buried secrets. Sam greeted them at his modest office, his sharp eyes scrutinizing the group. "Laura, you know I'm out of the game," Sam said, crossing his arms. "And you know I wouldn't be here unless it was important," Laura countered. "We need your help." Sam sighed, examining the documents and cassette tape. "This is big," he admitted. "But if these people are as dangerous as you say, you're playing with fire." Marcus leaned forward. "Fire or not, we have no choice. We need to know the full story." After hours of analysis, Sam uncovered a critical lead. Among the documents were bank statements tied to a shell organization called New Horizons Foundation, located in Toledo, Ohio. It appeared Robert Garrison had used this foundation to shield children from Eleanor's schemes and to hide crucial evidence. "This is where you'll find answers," Sam said. "But be careful. If Eleanor knows about this place, she won't hesitate to silence you." As they prepared to leave Cleveland, Marcus looked at Laura and Jennifer. "Robert left this for me to finish. I won't let him down." The group set off for Toledo, the shadow of Eleanor Hart looming closer with every mile. The truth was within reach, but so was danger. The sun had barely risen when Marcus, Laura, and Jennifer arrived in Toledo, Ohio. The quiet streets betrayed none of the chaos they carried with them, but the tension in the air was palpable. Their destination was a nondescript building in the heart of the city, tied to the New Horizons Foundation, an organization Robert Garrison had used to protect children and hide crucial evidence from Eleanor Hart's reach. "This doesn't look like much," Jennifer said as they parked a few blocks away, scanning the unassuming building from the car. Its cracked windows and faded paint suggested years of neglect. "That's probably the point," Laura replied, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "The less noticeable, the safer." Marcus gripped the photo of his father tightly. "Let's see what's inside." The building's entrance creaked as they pushed through. The interior was dimly lit, with peeling paint and the stale smell of damp wood. A small reception area greeted them, but it was vacant, save for a single bell on the desk. "This feels like a ghost town," Jennifer muttered. Marcus rang the bell. Moments later, an older man appeared from a back room. He wore thick glasses and a cardigan, his cautious expression giving way to surprise as he saw them. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice steady but wary. Marcus stepped forward. "We're here about Robert Garrison," he said. "He was connected to this place. We need answers." The man froze, his weathered face tightening. "Robert," he murmured, trailing off. He looked Marcus over, his eyes widening as though he were staring at a ghost. "You must be Marcus. How do you know me?" Marcus asked, stunned. The man nodded slowly. "Come with me. There's a lot you need to know." The man introduced himself as George Bennett, the current director of New Horizons. He led them into a cramped office filled with files and old records. Sitting behind a wooden desk that had seen better days, George sighed deeply. "Robert always said this day would come," George began. New Horizons wasn't just a foundation to help children. It was his way of protecting them from Eleanor Hart and the powerful people she worked with. Laura leaned forward. "Protecting them from what?" George opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the desk and slid it toward them. Eleanor used shelters like the one in Baltimore as fronts for money laundering and worse. When Robert found out, he tried to stop her. He funneled funds through New Horizons to hide children and keep them out of her grasp. Jennifer's face turned pale. "The fire, was it her doing?" she asked. George hesitated but then nodded gravely. Robert believed it was. He had just uncovered enough evidence to expose Eleanor. The fire destroyed the shelter and silenced most of the staff who knew the truth. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "And me?" Why am I part of this? George adjusted his glasses. Robert didn't just protect those kids. He protected you. Eleanor feared that with his knowledge, you could bring down her entire network. That's why he made sure New Horizons had the means to protect you, even after his death. Before they could ask more, footsteps echoed from the hallway. George froze. Were you followed? He asked, alarmed. No, we were careful, Laura replied. The door burst open. 3 men dressed in dark clothing and armed with pistols stepped into the room. You have something that doesn't belong to you, one of them said coldly. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of Jennifer and Laura, while George reached for a silent alarm under his desk. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear surging through him. The lead intruder smirked. We'll see about that. The standoff was broken by the wail of distant sirens. George's silent alarm had worked. The men exchanged tense glances before retreating into the hall, their footsteps fading as they fled. We have to go, George said, urgency in his voice. This building isn't safe anymore. Grabbing the folder, Marcus and the group followed George out a back exit and into an alley. As they regrouped in a small diner a few blocks away, George laid out their next move. Robert left something for you, Marcus. A fail-safe. It's in a deposit box in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The box contains everything Eleanor didn't want anyone to see. Jennifer frowned. Why didn't you tell us this earlier? Because once you have it, you'll become her primary target, George replied. That box is the key to ending this, but it will put all of you in more danger than you've ever faced. Marcus nodded, resolute. Then we have no choice. We're going to Pittsburgh. The road to Pittsburgh felt heavier with each passing mile. Marcus stared out the window, clutching the folder George had given him. It contained financial records and correspondence tying Eleanor to an intricate web of corruption. But it wasn't enough. They needed whatever Robert had hidden in the deposit box. Jennifer placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's arm. You're stronger than you think, she said. We'll finish what Robert started. As the city lights of Pittsburgh came into view, Marcus steeled himself for the next phase of their journey. The deposit box promised answers, but it also promised to bring Eleanor's wrath to their doorstep. The stakes had never been higher, but Marcus knew there was no turning back. Pittsburgh loomed on the horizon, its steel bridges and industrial skyline shrouded in the early morning fog. Marcus, Laura, and Jennifer drove cautiously into the city, knowing they were closing in on the truth. Their destination was a small bank near Shadyside, where Robert Garrison had left a deposit box containing the final piece of evidence against Eleanor Hart and her criminal empire. Laura, always methodical, had mapped out a plan. The bank opens at 9 a.m. We'll get the contents of the box and head straight to a safe location to analyze it. Whatever Robert hid in that box, Eleanor will do anything to stop us from seeing it, she said. Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. He gave everything to protect this. I won't let him down. The bank was unassuming, a modest 2-story building that blended into the quiet neighborhood. They parked a block away and approached cautiously. Inside, the air was sterile and quiet, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. A teller greeted them with a polite smile. How can I help you today? Marcus stepped forward. I need to access a deposit box. It was left by Robert Garrison. Here's the key. The teller examined the key and nodded. Right this way. The vault was a cold, echoing space lined with metal boxes. The teller led Marcus to box 327 and stepped back to give him privacy. With trembling hands, Marcus inserted the key and opened the box. Inside, he found a small stack of documents, a USB drive, and a handwritten note addressed to him. He unfolded the note, his heart pounding as he read Robert's words. Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I failed to stop Eleanor. But you can. These documents and the USB contain everything you need to expose her and her allies. Use them wisely. You are braver than you know, and I believe in you. Dad. Marcus clenched the note tightly, fighting back tears. Everything okay? Jennifer asked gently, standing behind him. He nodded, showing her the contents. We have it. Now let's get out of here. As they exited the vault, Laura noticed a black SUV idling across the street through the bank's front window. They're here, she whispered sharply. Marcus's chest tightened as he spotted two men in suits entering the building. One of them scanned the lobby, his eyes locking onto Marcus and the others. Go out the back, Laura said. I'll distract them. What? No, Marcus began, but Laura cut him off. Trust me. Go, she hissed, walking confidently toward the men. Marcus and Jennifer slipped through the employees-only door, navigating their way to the rear exit. Outside, they found an alley that led to a side street. As they hurried away, they heard the sound of raised voices inside the bank, followed by Laura's sharp retorts. Jennifer looked back anxiously. She'll be okay. She knows what she's doing, Marcus said, though his voice betrayed his worry. They ducked into a diner a few blocks away and sat in a booth near the window, scanning the street for signs of pursuit. Marcus placed the USB into his laptop and opened the files. What they found was staggering. The drive contained emails, financial records, and video evidence tying Eleanor Hart to a network of corruption that reached into politics, law enforcement, and major corporations. One file, labeled Final Proof, stood out. Marcus opened it to reveal a video of Robert speaking directly to the camera. If you're watching this, Marcus, it means I didn't make it. Eleanor and her associates will stop at nothing to keep their empire intact. But the evidence in these files will bring them down. I know this is a heavy burden, but you're not alone. Trust the people who stand with you. Together, you can finish this. Marcus closed the laptop, his hands trembling. He believed in me, he said, his voice breaking. Even when I didn't know who he was. Jennifer placed her hand on his. And now it's our turn to believe in you. We can do this. Laura joined them half an hour later, looking rattled but unharmed. They're onto us, but I gave them the slip. We need to move. Now. Jennifer glanced at the laptop. We have everything. It's time to release it. Marcus thought for a moment before responding. I know someone who can help. Ryan Carter, a journalist I trust, works in Buffalo, New York. If anyone can publish this without fear, it's him. Laura nodded. Then Buffalo it is. But we need to keep our guard up. Eleanor's not going to stop now. The drive to Buffalo was tense. Every car that appeared behind them felt like a threat, and every roadside stop was fraught with caution. Jennifer reviewed the files repeatedly, ensuring they were organized and ready for Ryan to analyze. You think he'll believe us? Jennifer asked. He'll believe the evidence, Marcus replied. And he won't back down. As they approached Buffalo, the weight of their mission pressed heavily on Marcus. They were closer than ever to exposing the truth, but the danger was growing with every step. Eleanor and her network wouldn't go down without a fight. The sun began to set as they entered the city, casting Buffalo in shades of orange and gray. The group knew the confrontation ahead would be the most challenging yet, but they also knew they were on the verge of something monumental. Marcus looked out at the city skyline, gripping the photo of his father in his hand. This is for you, Dad, he murmured. Buffalo, New York, was cloaked in twilight as Marcus, Laura, and Jennifer arrived at their destination. The office of Ryan Carter, an investigative journalist known for exposing powerful figures. Ryan had always prided himself on uncovering the truth, no matter the cost, and Marcus hoped his old friend would rise to the occasion once again. The group parked a few blocks away and cautiously approached the modest building. Marcus knocked on the door, and moments later, Ryan answered. His rugged features and sharp gaze softened when he recognized Marcus. Marcus? It's been years. What's going on? Ryan asked, stepping aside to let them in. "There's no time for small talk," Marcus replied. "I have something huge, and I need your help to publish it." Ryan gestured toward his cluttered desk. "Start talking." Once inside, Marcus, Laura, and Jennifer laid out everything. The files, Robert's connection to Eleanor Hart, and the fire at the Baltimore shelter. Ryan listened intently, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When Marcus handed over the USB drive, Ryan inserted it into his computer. He leaned forward, scanning the files, his jaw tightening with every discovery. "This is explosive," Ryan said after a long silence. "These records tie Eleanor Hart to politicians, CEOs, and law enforcement. If this goes public, it'll bring down half the power structure in this country." "That's the idea," Laura said firmly. "But we need someone who won't back down under pressure." "That's why we came to you." Ryan nodded. "I know exactly what to do. I'll send this to my editor at the Buffalo Chronicle. He's independent, and he won't bow to threats." As Ryan began uploading the files, the group's relief was short-lived. Jennifer glanced out the window and froze. "They're here," she whispered. Outside, 2 black SUVs had pulled up. Men in dark suits began fanning out around the building, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Ryan cursed under his breath. "How did they find us?" "We don't have time for that now," Laura said, pulling the shades down. "Keep uploading. We'll hold them off." Marcus clenched his fists. "We can't let them stop us now." The first loud bang on the door echoed through the office. "Open up. We know you're in there," a voice barked. Ryan typed furiously. "I need 10 more minutes to get everything out." Marcus grabbed a heavy chair and wedged it under the doorknob. "That's all the time we'll give you," he said, determined. Laura pulled a canister of pepper spray from her bag, while Jennifer armed herself with a metal rod she found in the corner. The men outside began ramming the door. "Stay focused," Laura shouted to Ryan as the door began to splinter. The attackers forced their way in, but Marcus and Jennifer were ready. Marcus swung a lamp at the first man, knocking him back into the hallway. Jennifer jabbed another in the stomach with the rod, sending him reeling. Laura sprayed a third in the face, blinding him. Despite their efforts, the attackers started to overpower them. One man grabbed Marcus, slamming him against the wall. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the sound of sirens filled the air. Ryan grinned from his desk. "I called the cops the second I saw those SUVs." The attackers hesitated, retreating as the sirens grew louder. They fled out the back, disappearing into the night just as police cars screeched to a halt outside. After giving their statements to the police, the group regrouped in Ryan's office. His editor had confirmed receipt of the files and was already preparing the story for publication. "It'll be live by morning," Ryan said, leaning back in his chair. "Eleanor's empire is about to crumble." Marcus sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over him. "It's done," he said quietly. "We finished what my father started." Jennifer smiled, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just finish it, Marcus. You gave his sacrifice meaning." The next morning, the headline on the Buffalo Chronicle shook the nation. "Corruption Network Exposed. Eleanor Hart and Associates Tied to Fraud, Arson, and More." News outlets across the country picked up the story. The fallout was immediate. Arrests were made, resignations submitted, and Eleanor's name became synonymous with betrayal and greed. In the weeks that followed, Marcus, Jennifer, and Laura stayed out of sight, knowing that even though Eleanor's network had been exposed, there were still those who might seek revenge. But for now, they could breathe. One evening, Marcus stood alone, holding the photo of Robert Garrison. The weight of the past had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered, "for believing in me." Jennifer approached, breaking his solitude. "What now?" she asked. Marcus smiled faintly. "Now we live. And we make sure no one ever hides the truth again."